Chapter 9 is about development. So we're talking about what makes a country a more developed country or a less developed country, and how development varies by gender, by country, and what are the obstacles to development. In key issue 1, we'll be looking at the HDI, or the Human Development Index. We'll look at the health factor, the standard of living factor, and the access to knowledge factor. And we'll look at variations in level of development within a country and within regions in that country. So the United Nations, or the UN, which you know by now is a political group, right, developed a metric to measure the level of development of every country. And this measurement is called the Human Development Index. It's based on primarily 3 factors: a decent standard of living, a long and healthy life, and access to knowledge. Countries group into 4 different classes, ranging from developed, which is a very high number, to developing, which would be a lower number. When you look at Human Development Index, you want a high number. And so there's going to be a lot of different abbreviations in this chapter, a lot of different measurements we need to kind of review and remember. And what we're going to want to do is you're going to want to list them. Like, which ones do you want a high number for and which ones do you want a low number for? So the very best, if we had the perfect life, if people had long life, access to knowledge, and everyone in the country had a decent standard of living, your HDI score would be a 1.0 or a 100%. If you look at the country now, most highly developed countries, so most countries in Europe, Australia, parts of South America, the US, Canada, Japan, and South Korea, you can see that they are considered very, very highly developed countries, and their HDI is a 0.79 or a 79%. And then you have high developing, which are these kind of turquoise color countries, medium developed, low developing, and then you have countries that we have no data for. You might have no data for a country like South Sudan because it hasn't been around long enough to measure data, and right now it's caught up in conflict, which makes that measurement harder. You have countries like West Sahara, which is because its borders are in conflict. We don't really have data collected for it either. And then places like Greenland, where there's very little permanent settlement. Here we have ranking the different countries by their HDI. And so you should be familiar with the general trend, like where are the countries with the highest level of development, and then where are the ones that are kind of like medium developed and the least developed. And here it's broken down by region, so you can kind of get an idea for that. So what do we mean by decent standard of living? Standard of living is based on 2 different functions. The gross national income, or the GNI. This is the value of the output of goods and services produced in a country annually, including the money that leaves and enters the country. You might have heard of GDP, gross domestic product. It's a similar measurement, but it doesn't account for money entering and leaving the country. It just looks at goods and services. So GNI is a better measurement in today's world with, the stock market. So in a market capitalist world where you have banking interests and loaning institutes, the money coming and going needs to be measured as well. So GNI is a more accurate measurement. The per capita GNI is the amount of wealth, the average amount of wealth per person, but it's not really how it's distributed. So you could have a really high per capita GNI, but still have a high amount of income inequality within a country. And so the second measurement they use to establish this decent standard of living would be the purchasing power parity, or the PPP. And that's when you take what the gross national income is, and you look at what is the cost of living. So how far will, in the US, how far will $1 take you? So making $10 an hour in the US doesn't give you the same standard of living as making the same amount of money in another country. So purchasing power parity looks at how far your money will take you. So in this one, you can see it's GNI PPP per capita. So this map is looking at the gross national income, broken down, adjusted for the purchasing power parity per capita of individuals. And so here, per capita, it's 20,000 above in most highly developed countries. In the mediumly developed countries, you've got about 10 to 20,000. The pale countries are below $5,000 per person. And again, there's places we don't have data for right now. So 20,000 per person is high. Keep in mind that when you're looking at the GNI PPP per capita or per individual, you're also counting like every person in the country, so infants and children. And 20,000 or above means it could be higher. The second standard of living for development that the UN looks for the HGI is a long and healthy life. So access to good health is an important measure of development. So one of the things they look at is your life expectancy at birth. So the global average when you're born is 70 years old in the world now, which is pretty high, compared to what it was 20 or 30 years ago. In a developed country, your life expectancy at birth is about 80 years, and in a developing country, it's about 68 years. So less time in a developing country. So the more we can bring this number up, the higher standard of living we're bringing to the world. And again, you can see some regional patterns. And so these highly developed countries up here, they're on average is in the late 70s or over 80 in some places. And then in like sub-Saharan Africa, it's, a little over 50 instead. So there's still a lot of variance in the world. The third factor for development according to the UN is access to knowledge. So the United Nations considers years of schooling to be one of the most critical measures of the ability of an individual to gain access needed for development. So the better educated your population is, the more choices they have for different professions, the more earning power they have, and the better investments you can make within your country. So a country with a highly skilled, highly educated workforce has more opportunity than a country without. So globally, the average years of schooling per person is 7 years. In a developing country, it's about 6 years. In a developed country, it's about 11 years. So that would include, like in the United States, kindergarten until you're a senior in high school. Nope, I'm just kidding. That's 13 years. So in a developed country, it's about 11 years, so until you're about 16 years old. In a developed country, however, they expect you to go to school for about 16 years, which would include college. In a developing country, most people expect you to go to school for about 11 years, but it doesn't always work out. So if you look at the mean years of schooling, it's 10 and above in those highly developed countries, 7 to 10 in like those medium developed countries, and below 7 in some areas. And again, there are some countries where there's no data. And then you look at the expected years of schooling as well. So access to knowledge also includes the quality of schooling. So what is the pupil to teacher ratio? So the global average is 24 students per every teacher. In a developing country, you end up with 26 students per teacher. In a developed country, the average is more like 14 students per one teacher. In the US, we fall into this developing country pattern more than we fall into the developed, because in elementary school, most of our class sizes are in the 20s, right? 25. If you look at literacy rate for quality of schooling as well, in a developed country, it's 99% or higher. In a developing country, 70 to 90% of the population on average is literate. So here, if you see the pupil to teacher ratio below 15, it's kind of marked out here. I'm not sure if this measurement is entirely accurate based on my experience as a teacher, but we'll have to research it. I remember last year I also kind of disagreed with this because my experience is that we're at in the least 15 to 24, but percent literacy, the United States really ranks really high in literacy. So compared to even other developed countries, we have a high rate of literacy. We also have some gender measurements. And I think that gender measurements we're going to go into in the next section. So I believe we're on key issue 2 now.